Hey everyone, we just wanted to provide you with a little bit more in terms of resources and information about how you can refine your data sets because as several of you are experiencing already, when you're looking to do kind of a progressively enhanced visualization, where maybe you're using a little bit less data for your close scenario, but you're using more for your middle scenario or reach scenario, you don't want to end up in a position of keeping lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of copies of your data, which is very often what you can end up having to do if you are doing things like downloading a data set in Excel and then removing some columns so that you can turn it into JSON with Mr. Data Converter, or say you want to select only bits of data between certain, in a certain time period, for example. What you don't want to do is you don't want to get stuck, as I said, having lots of copies of the data, because that's a really good way to kind of introduce errors. If there's a fix that needs to happen, you want to make sure that you have kind of one centralized data set, but that you can subselect the relevant bits of that to generate those static JS files pretty easily. And so to do this, we're going to actually look at a tool called OpenRefine. OpenRefine is actually a really great tool for kind of top-level data analysis in the first place. It is an open source project. It was briefly acquired by Google, and then it was re-released back into the wild. But what that means is that it's free to use. It works on both Macs and PCs. And what it does is it lets us, as I said, do really quick kind of like filtering and overviews of information. But it also lets us easily export subsets of data from a given data set without actually having to change that underlying data set. So it's really, really handy for creating subsets of data that you might want to use, for example, for different views of a visualization. So to get started here, I'm actually going to download this. So something to know about OpenRefine is that it actually runs in a browser window, so it appears in a browser window, and I would, in this case, again, probably recommend using Chrome for this. But it actually is local to your machine. So the good news about that is that it means that you can use this tool without revealing your data to third parties, which would of course be the case if you were doing something like this with an online application, and so you don't really want to be doing that in many cases. So I'm going to go ahead and take this DMG because I'm on a Mac, double click it, but as I said, it does mean that interacting with it is a little bit different than, for example, with Excel, because you don't have the kinds of keyboard shortcuts that you tend to have with a regular desktop application. So it's very, very simple, but just going to be a little bit of an adjustment. So having done that now, I'm going to go ahead and open up my applications folder, and whoops, don't know what that is. Where's my applications folder? Oh, here it is. Okay, never mind. Yes, I did that. Now let's open up applications and see how we do. Okay, so here we are. It's still called Google Refine. I'm not really sure why. But it has this sort of diamond thing, and that's its idea of, ooh, we're faceting data. So that's a big feature of OpenRefine, is that it lets you quote unquote facet data. So filter very quickly by subsets of information. So as soon as this opens up, we'll see. So this is actually auto-launched in Firefox for me. So up here in the browser bar, you'll see this web address. It's an IP address, really pointing to your local machine. I would suggest bookmarking it. It's one of these things where when you go to launch it later, it doesn't always auto-launch a browser window, and then you're kind of like, I think it's on, but I don't know where it is. So I'm going to, in Chrome here, I'm going to put in this. This is it's actually a regular IP address that just happens to point to your local machine. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to favorite that and say done. Okay, so now we get to the part of working with data. And so for this purpose, I have gone ahead and downloaded a data set, which is a pretty big data set, that I got from the New York City Open Data Portal. I think many of you are familiar with this. Once again, the thing about OpenRefine is that it actually handles data sets that are, it better handles very large data sets. It's better at that than, for example, Excel is. It is, and if you ever have a really large data set that you need to work with, you can actually change the settings on your computer to allot more memory to OpenRefine so that it can do work on larger data sets. Okay, so what this is showing us is, again, this is very similar to what happens when we open up something in Excel, except that it gives us a nice little preview here. So it says, what's the project name? And I'm going to say Manhattan Tree Test because I'm just sort of demoing this. You can see that we're getting this thing, so it's asking us what kind of file it is. So this is also really handy if you're dealing with data that is not in a CSV. One thing I want to point out is JSON here. JSON is kind of notorious for being terrible to get into a format that's easy to analyze. So for example, if you were to use the Twitter API to pull back all of somebody's tweets, you're going to get those tweets as JSON, and parsing that JSON into a CSV that you can do things like find out how many tweets they tweeted in a particular day, or you know, how many had a particular hashtag or something. Any kind of subset information that you would want to do on that is really hard to do in JSON. JSON is not for analysis, it's really for publishing. And so it's awesome that OpenRefine handles this. But very simple, you can see we can select this, you know, it's a CSV, we could do TSV or something else. This is sort of making some smart guesses about how we want to treat the information. So again, this is something that Excel does in the background very often. So when it says parse one lines as next one, it's trying to say next one lines as column headers. What it means is the first row is the column headers, which is true. We can load subsets of data. So again, if you have a very, very large file, you might want to say, look, I only want to load the first 5,000 rows of data. And then the next time around, you might load, you know, from you know, you might ignore the first 5,000 rows and then load the next 5,000 rows. So really, it says it's a power tool for working with messy data, and that's pretty accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create Project. It's going to take a minute here to go through it. And now we have something that looks vaguely like a spreadsheet. Now again, a few things to point out. This will only ever show me at most 50 rows at a time. I've got it at 25 right now. It does give me a nice, very quick overview that I've got around 5,200 rows, 52,000 rows of data, which is actually, again, one of those really useful bits of information that Excel it's kind of hard to get out of Excel. You sort of have to scroll to the bottom and stuff. But it means that I'm going to have this, I'll have this right-left scroll, but if I never am going to scroll through my entire data set in this, okay? That's not how it works. And in fact, generally scrolling through an entire data set isn't very useful to begin with. But what it does let me do really, really nicely is apply this sort of facet filter thing, okay? So it does a lot of different kinds of data manipulation, but one of the things that's really handy is, let's say, for example, I wanted to know how many trees are in zip code, I don't know, let's do 10027, okay? So what I can do is I can say text facet, and instantly you can see it's showing me not only how many choices there are, okay? So it's saying there's 45 different entries in zip code. It's also showing me how many entries have that value, okay? So really great overview tool here, super quick and easy to do. I can go scroll through here and I can say, oh, yep, if I just click on it, it's just going to show me the ones that are in 10027. So instantaneously, I have a measure right here. I have 2,026 matching rows. That means there are 2,026 trees in zip code 10027. I can get all of the information here, okay? And that's kind of it. I can create additional facets. Let's say, for example, I wanted to know, I don't know what party means, but let's pretend I did. If I did text facet, I could say, okay, well, just show me all the ones that are odd. And I can sub-select down into, I assume that's actually the side of the street. I can sub-select down into this data set. I could go down to, you know, what are the cross streets, what are the building numbers. That's not very meaningful. But you really can get just like great overview numbers here very, very quickly. And if I want to remove that, see, it's changing the view. This is what the facet means. It's changing the view, but it's not changing the underlying data. If I want to revert, I can just go ahead and X out of that. So in this case, imagine that you were working with a subset. We can also do subsets based on numbers. So if I use a numerical facet, for example, let's do tree location. I'm going to do numeric facet, okay? And it's sort of showing me that there's what all of the versions are, but it's actually currently sub-selecting on tree condition, and you can see, the easiest way to see this is how it's changing the matching rows. Now obviously I don't really know what this means, but it's alleging, so there's a very tiny histogram down there. There we go. So, and it's very pale, it's pretty difficult to see, but it gives you kind of a sense of the distribution of numbers within that numeric facet. So you'll be able to use that in some cases to just do, if you wanted to do subsets of a numeric distribution, kind of get a sense of the shape of a data set. It's really, really handy. So the last thing that I want to address here is how we export from here. So I can go ahead and export, I can export this into a range of values. I'm probably just going to go for comma separated again. But the thing that I want to note here is that when I hit export, okay, this is going to export this whatever view is currently visible. So you know how in Excel you can like filter and you can hide things, but when you export it's always the same full data set. Here it's going to export actually just the subset that is currently visible. So I'm going to say comma separated value, and I'm going to go up to my folder here on the desktop, okay, and I'm going to say edit, just so I have that. So I am still creating an additional copy of the data, but the important thing is that I have one central copy that has everything in it, and I haven't made any changes to that, because if you see, if I X out of this filter, I'm back to my original 5,200 rows. So just to test that this worked how we think it did, I'm going to go ahead and open up this edit, and I'm going to open it with Excel again so I can test my assumption here. I don't need to see whatever is the last thing in here. Okay, and this might still take a little bit of time to open, but we can just confirm for ourselves that we now just have this subset of data that is 10027. So again, you know, these days when people put data, you know, use data for visualizations, what they're doing mostly is this: they're creating, you know, individual files and you know, saving them. So this is now something that we could put through Mr. Data Converter, you know, get back JSON, load it up the same way we normally would. We can do the same thing with columns as well. If I come back over to here, well, actually, the chances are you're not going to want to take out columns very often, but I could say I could remove this column, okay, right, and do an export again. Now, the thing that I want to point out about removing columns in OpenRefine is that it saves a history of this, right? Which means, again, so it's sort of like it's basically doing like a version control. It's doing the same kind of thing we do with Git. If I want to revert that, if I want to undo that, and I'm like, oh, geez, I didn't mean to do that, I can actually just roll back a step by clicking on that link, and it's going to return that data. So this is a really, really great tool. I strongly recommend you all experiment with it. It's a great way to save files. If you need to go back to sort of the start page because you want to do a new one, the easiest way is to just click the icon in the top left here. And it's going to save your place. It's doing autosaves in the background all the time. So you don't need to worry about, oh, you know, did I remember to save that? So anyhow, that's just a quick overview of OpenRefine. I think you all will find it useful for your final projects and for doing general data analysis in the future. So if you have a chance, I'd recommend installing this before you come to class on Wednesday, and we'll go over a little bit of this then. All right, have a good rest of the week.